David R. Guttery is the Chief Executive Officer of Keystone Financial Group in Trussville, Alabama. David Guttery and Seth Edgil are financial advisors who represent Emeritus Investment Company, LLC, and Emeritus Advisory Services. Please stay tuned through the end of the video for additional important disclosure information.
Hello everyone. Today I'm joined by Seth Edgil of Keystone Financial Group for a conversation about something that affects just about everyone, regardless of age or where they are financially. Life rarely goes exactly according to plan. Careers change, families grow, markets move, and priorities evolve over time. Seth, thanks so much for being with us today. So why do you think many people struggle with adapting their financial plans as life changes?
Thanks for having me. I think many people believe a financial plan is something you create once and then simply follow for the next 20 or 30 years. In reality, that's rarely how life works. When we look back over the course of someone's financial life, very few people experience a straight path. They change jobs, receive promotions, start businesses, help children through college, care for aging parents, receive inheritances, experience market volatility, or simply find that their priorities have changed over time. None of these situations necessarily mean something has gone wrong. They simply mean life looks different than it did when the original plan was created. One of the biggest values of financial planning isn't creating a perfect roadmap. It's having a process that allows you to adjust as life unfolds.
You mentioned adapting to change. Before we started filming, you used an analogy that I thought was really interesting involving a GPS. Can you explain that?
Absolutely. Have you ever noticed that your GPS never gets frustrated with you? You miss a turn, you decide to take another road, traffic forces you onto a detour, and your GPS never says, well, the route is ruined, we'll never get there. You really should have listened to me the first time. It simply pauses for a moment and says, recalculating. I've always thought that's a great illustration of what good financial planning should look like. Life doesn't stop changing simply because you created a financial plan. Your plan should be flexible enough to adjust as circumstances change. The GPS isn't concerned with where you should have been 5 miles ago. It starts with one question: where are you now? I think financial planning works much the same way.
Well, that's an interesting perspective because I think many people spend a lot of time focusing on what they wish they had done differently.
I think that's very common. People often tell themselves things like, I wish I had started investing sooner. I wish I had saved more. I wish I had purchased that house before interest rates increased. Those are understandable thoughts, but they don't really help us make today's decisions. From a planning perspective, we can't change yesterday's choices. What we can do is evaluate today's circumstances and determine the most appropriate path forward. That's one reason I encourage people not to think of financial planning as looking backward. It's really about making informed decisions based on where you are today and where you're trying to go tomorrow.
So what kinds of life events should cause someone to recalculate their financial plan?
There are quite a few. Sometimes it's something obvious, like changing jobs or preparing for retirement. Other times it's less obvious. Perhaps your income has increased significantly over the past several years. Maybe you've paid off your mortgage. Your children have become financially independent. You receive an inheritance, or maybe you've simply accumulated substantially more assets than you had when your plan was originally developed. Those are all good reasons to revisit your financial strategy. The interesting thing is that recalculating isn't always prompted by something negative. Sometimes positive life events create entirely new planning opportunities.
Well, you mentioned retirement. I think many people assume that once retirement starts, most of the planning is finished. Is that generally true?
Actually, Retirement often marks the beginning of a different type of planning. During someone's working years, many of the questions revolve around accumulation. How much should I save? Am I contributing enough to my retirement accounts? Should I be investing differently? As retirement approaches, those questions begin to evolve. People start asking, how will I replace my paycheck? How should I think about taking withdrawals? What role will Social Security play? How much cash should I have available? How do taxes fit into all of this? Those aren't necessarily more complicated questions, but they are different questions than someone might have been asking 10 or 15 years earlier. That's another example of recalculating. The destination may not have changed, the route simply looks different than it did before.
Well, it sounds like you're saying financial planning is really an ongoing process rather than a one-time event.
I think that's exactly right. One thing I often remind people is that your financial plan should evolve because your life evolves. Markets don't remain the same, tax laws don't remain the same, interest rates don't remain the same, healthcare costs don't remain the same. Even our personal goals often change as we move through different stages of life. If everything around us continues to change, it probably makes sense for our financial strategy to be reviewed periodically as well. The goal isn't to constantly make dramatic changes. The goal is to make sure the plan you're following still reflects the life you're actively living today.
Let's talk about some of the specific areas people should be reviewing. When someone recalculates their financial plan, what are some of the biggest opportunities they may be overlooking?
One of the first things we often evaluate is whether someone's investment strategy still aligns with where they are in life. When someone is 35 years old, they may have decades before they'll need to rely on those investments for income. Their primary objective is often long-term growth. As time passes, that conversation naturally evolves. Someone may begin asking whether they're taking an appropriate amount of risk, whether their portfolio is properly diversified, or whether their investments are positioned to help support future income needs. That doesn't necessarily mean someone should become overly conservative simply because they're getting older. It means the investment strategy should reflect both their goals and the role those assets are expected to play in the years ahead. Again, it's another example of recalculating based on changing circumstances rather than simply following the same strategy indefinitely.
Well, markets have experienced a great deal of volatility over the last several years. Does that cause people to recalculate as well?
It certainly causes people to ask questions, and I actually think that's healthy. Periods of market volatility often encourage people to revisit their financial plans. The important thing is making sure they're evaluating the plan itself rather than reacting emotionally to short-term headlines. For example, someone may ask, has my timeline changed? Do I still have the same income needs? Has my overall financial picture changed? Those are productive questions. On the other hand, making significant investment decisions based solely on recent market movements can sometimes create unintended consequences. One of the advantages of having a comprehensive financial plan is that it provides context. Rather than reacting to what's happening this week or this month, you're making decisions within the framework of your broader long-term objectives.
You mentioned income earlier. I think that's one of the biggest questions people have as retirement approaches. They've spent years saving, but eventually those savings have to become income.
That's exactly right. For many people, retirement represents the first time in decades that they stop receiving a regular paycheck. That changes the planning conversation considerably. Instead of asking how much should be contributed each month, people begin asking where their income will come from and in what order they should use different assets. Should withdrawals come from taxable accounts first? Should retirement accounts be used initially? Would Roth assets be more valuable later? How does Social Security fit into that overall strategy? Those decisions can influence not only retirement income, but also taxes over many years. There isn't one answer that's appropriate for everyone. It depends on each family's circumstances, but these are exactly the kinds of questions we often evaluate as part of the planning process.
You mentioned Social Security. That's something people seem to have a lot of questions about. Can that be a recalculation point?
They do, and understandably so. Many people focus on one question: when should I claim my benefit? While that's certainly important, I think a better question is, how does Social Security fit into my overall retirement strategy? For some individuals, claiming earlier may be appropriate. Others may benefit from delaying. The decision can depend on factors like health, marital status, other income sources, retirement goals, and overall tax considerations. Rather than looking at Social Security as a standalone decision, we often view it as one component of a much broader retirement income strategy.
Taxes seem to be another area that people don't always think about until they have to write the check.
That's true. And taxes are one of the areas that can change considerably over the course of a retirement. Many people spend years focused on growing their retirement accounts, but eventually those accounts may become taxable when distributions begin. Depending on someone's situation, there may be opportunities to improve tax efficiency throughout retirement. For example, we may evaluate how withdrawals are being coordinated between taxable accounts, traditional retirement accounts, and Roth accounts. Sometimes people hear the phrase tax planning and assume we're talking about avoiding taxes altogether. That's not really the objective. The objective is simply making thoughtful decisions that may improve tax efficiency over time while remaining consistent with someone's broader financial goals.
And you also mentioned having adequate cash available. Why is that so important?
One thing we've learned over the years is that flexibility has value. Unexpected expenses rarely arrive on a convenient schedule. Healthcare expenses, home repairs, helping family members, vehicle replacements, market volatility. Having appropriate cash reserves can provide flexibility during those situations. It may reduce the likelihood that someone feels forced to sell long-term investments during an unfavorable market environment simply because they need immediate liquidity. The appropriate amount of cash will vary depending on someone's circumstances, but reviewing liquidity is often an important part of recalculating a financial plan.
As people move through different stages of life, are there planning items that simply get forgotten?
Absolutely. One of the most common things we encounter is outdated beneficiary designations. Someone may have opened an account 20 years ago and simply never reviewed the paperwork again. The same can be true for wills, powers of attorney, healthcare directives, or even life insurance coverage. Those aren't items most people think about every year, but major life events like marriages, births, deaths, divorces, or retirement can all create reasons to revisit those documents. Sometimes recalculating isn't about changing investments at all. Sometimes it's simply making sure the rest of your financial life still reflects your current wishes and circumstances.
One topic we haven't discussed yet is healthcare. It seems like that's becoming a much larger part of retirement planning than it was for previous generations. How could that be a place to recalculate?
I think that's fair to say. People are living longer, which is certainly something to celebrate. At the same time, longer life expectancies often mean healthcare becomes a more significant financial consideration. One of the questions we often encourage people to think about is not simply whether they'll have enough assets to retire, but whether those assets are prepared to support them through the later stages of retirement as well. Healthcare expenses, Medicare decisions, prescription costs, and potentially long-term care can all become meaningful pieces of someone's overall financial picture. Again, this doesn't necessarily mean everyone needs the same solution. Some families evaluate traditional long-term care insurance. Others consider hybrid life insurance strategies with chronic illness benefits. Some choose to self-fund those potential expenses. The important point is simply recognizing that healthcare planning deserves thoughtful consideration before a crisis occurs rather than during one.
Well, it sounds like a lot of these conversations really come down to preparing for the possibilities rather than trying to predict the future.
Exactly. One thing I've learned over the years is that financial planning isn't about predicting what's going to happen next. None of us know what markets will do next year. We don't know what Congress may do with tax laws. We don't know exactly when we'll retire or what healthcare costs will look like 10 years from now. Instead of trying to predict every future event, we try to build flexibility into the plan. If something changes, we recalculate. That approach tends to create far less stress than trying to guess every twist and turn in years advance.
One thing I imagine people struggle with is knowing when to make changes versus simply staying the course.
That's a great question, because sometimes the best decision is actually not making a major change. There's an old saying that not every market movement deserves a portfolio movement. The same principle often applies to financial planning. Sometimes life changes significantly and the plan should change along with it. Other times, the headlines are changing far more than your personal circumstances are. That's why it's important to distinguish between reacting to the news and responding to meaningful changes in your own financial life. Good planning is intentional. It's not reactive.
So for someone watching today, how often should they actually review their financial plan?
There's not one schedule that's appropriate for everyone, but I generally encourage people to review their overall financial picture at least annually. If no major life events have occurred, it's valuable to ask a few simple questions. Has anything changed with my family? Has my income changed? Have my goals changed? Have tax laws or retirement rules changed? Do my beneficiaries still reflect my wishes? Does my investment strategy still align with my objectives? Sometimes the answer to every one of those questions is no, everything still makes sense. That's actually a productive review because it confirms you're still on the right path. Other times, one small change uncovers several planning opportunities that may have otherwise gone unnoticed.
As we wrap up, what advice would you leave people with if they feel like they've fallen behind financially?
I'd probably tell them the same thing your GPS tells you. Recalculate. Don't spend all your energy looking in the rearview mirror. Everyone can point to financial decisions they wish they had made differently. The reality is that yesterday's decisions are no longer available to us. Today's decisions are. Maybe you're ahead of where you expected to be. Maybe you're behind. Maybe life has unfolded exactly as planned, or maybe it's taken several unexpected turns. The important thing is understanding where you are today and making the next thoughtful decision from there. One thing I've learned is that financial success is rarely the result of one perfect decision. It's usually the result of many good decisions made consistently over time. That's what a financial plan should help you accomplish. Not perfection, progress. Because like your GPS, a good financial plan isn't focused on the turn you missed. It's focused on finding the best path forward from exactly where you are today.
Seth, thank you for joining us today and sharing your perspective on why financial plans should evolve as life changes.
Thank you for having me. This material is for general information only and is not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All investing involves risk, including loss of principal. No strategy assures success or protects against loss.
Thanks again, Seth. For additional information, Seth may be reached through the means listed on the following screen. For the Trustful Tribune, I'm Brandon Dawkins.
David Guttery and Seth Edgil independently offer securities and investment advisory services through Emeritus Investment Company, LLC, member FINRA, SIPC, and Emeritus Advisory Services. Information provided in today's segments is gathered from sources believed to be reliable. However, its accuracy cannot be guaranteed and should not be interpreted as tax or legal advice. Any performance stated is past performance and is not indicative of future results.